when you think about the role that medicinal plants have in healthcare and medicine and just overall lifestyle wellness, what's your sort of approach and philosophy there? How do you see all of that fitting in? Well, I think that's really important to illustrate, because the way that I think most people interact with food and plants and medicines and everything is, we tend to grow up thinking of things of like, well, food keeps you alive.
Right.
Dietary supplements help fulfill some nutritional deficit or whatever. And then you've got pharmaceuticals, which are the real medicine. And, and, what you're illustrating is actually the whole spectrum is influencing your pharmacology, your physiology, and it starts to put much more emphasis and responsibility on a person to manage how they're engaging with all things in their life, and not just thinking of like, I take medicine when I'm sick, but more preventative.
Well, as we expected, we kind of jumped right into a pretty critical topic, I think, in the realm of health and disease, right? And that is just daily choices. And if we think of everything as medicine, or, the dose defines the poison, right? I mean, even like you think about music, like, some music is very uplifting and very just focusing and enhances cognition, and other music can be very dissonant and, and that's all okay. It's all choices. But when it gets into what we put into our bodies, I think if we could just, like, I think you said the word was responsibility, take responsibility for our everyday choices and how they affect our health or disease. And that idea that you said that, as a kid, you started out with, there was food that kept you alive, and like, there's like supplements that could give you some nutrients. And then there was medicine, which is pharmacy, right? I mean, within that model, there's no responsibility on you to make any choices, about your health. And so we're basically just supporting a pharmaceutical mechanism of disease, of treating disease. If you make the wrong choices, you're going to get to the point where you need pharmaceutical medicine. And that's just kind of the way it goes, right? And the reality that we see is that there isn't a clear distinction. It's basically, if you make good choices along the way, and of course, you got to have good genes, you got to have a decent constitution. There's factors that can come in with, but if you just consider everybody sort of on a level playing field, the choices that we make are going to direct us towards, needing those pharmaceutical medicines or never needing them,
Well, and the whole concept of diet, I mean, it's changing now, but all throughout my upbringing, I'm sure yours too, the focus is on, I don't want to be fat. And so you diet to control your weight, not your health.
Right.
Which are very, very different things.
Absolutely. And I mean, and like all these traditional medical systems looked at different, archetypes, or sort of, we in the Ayurvedic system they would call it doshas, right? The idea that some people are more kaphic, they have a tendency to build more tissue, like, and that some of that might be a little bit of layer of adipose tissue, right?
I'm one of those people.
Yeah, and again, it's not a matter of like, oh, the optimum health of the human being looks like this, and you got a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger, flexing his muscles or something like that.
Right.
That's not the real story. The real story is that everybody has a place that works for their constitution, for their genetics, for their microbiota, and how that all works together to provide for them, health.
Right.
And I think you're right. This idea that, being fat is a bad thing is very undermining. It's
it sends you on the wrong track.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of, it's just like, hey, making healthy choices. How do you make healthy choices?
Right.
Just teaching people to make healthy choices. And I think there's a lot of, sickness that goes into, and mental sickness. I think mental health is such a huge piece of what we're suffering from. We look at the physical world and our bodies and how we're, sickness and cancer and everything else, but it's really the mental health, right, that's driving it all.
Well, and it's all connected, right? I mean, the gut brain axis,
right. Absolutely.
and everything. We now understand that what's going on in the gut is influencing the central nervous system.
Hugely.
All of these different pieces, and vice versa. There's this bi-directional communication going on, and there have been studies looking at things like schizophrenia, bipolar, autism, all sorts of different things that show very strong correlations between gut health and how those conditions present themselves.
Yeah.
And while you and I might be exposed to that research and kind of view that as, at this point, kind of common knowledge, I don't think it is to a lot of people. Just how intimately those things are connected.
Those old patterns or old habits die hard, right? Or die slowly,
right. Yeah.
I mean, the whole field of neurogastroenterology has been just so fascinating, because not only is it this bidirectional communication, but we've found that in the vagus nerve system, right, which is this deep endocrine control network, right, which is just basically setting us up for, balance and homeostasis, that 95% of the signaling between the mesenteric, neurological system, the network there, is going from the gut up to the brain. That's pretty fascinating, because I've always felt like that my brain or my mind, it's here. It's not up here. Like, it's being processed here and being filtered and being put through all kinds of channels that I've created through my life experience. But there's a place in my gut that I just either know something is right or know something is wrong, And I'm always trying to find out, how can I tune back into that? And it's just something that I think a lot of us know. And we're talking about these old patterns, and people haven't studied the research yet, but I think most people can agree that a lot of big decisions in their life
are gut decisions.
If they got it, if they feel it here, they really feel it. They really know it, And I think that, just bringing back to your original question about, how do I view medicinal plants, or how do I think about botanical medicine? And I think it's a major ecological influencer. I think you and I both talk about ecology and ecosystems a lot. And I think that might be hard for some listeners to just get, like, what are we talking about? And I really just mean, inside the body, what is the material that we're bringing through the digestive tract, which for all intents and purposes is not in our bodies. It's actually a separate container that we carry around with us, so that we can hold the material that we are, then sticking our roots into, like a tree with the ground, to pull the nutrients out. And we like to carry some around with us so that we can be mobile, right? And not be a sessile plant, right? Because a plant
is important for survival, so that we can go periods of time without eating.
Exactly. And plants are sessile autotrophs, right? They just sit in one place and they're nestled into the soil. And that's a beautiful strategy, and it works really well for them. They send out their seeds and spread their pollen and all that stuff. It's beautiful to watch that happen. But where we are is taking the energy that they've produced as plants, eating it, carrying it in our bodies, and being able to move around and do things. And I think that's really an important piece to understand for people, that we are doing the same basic thing that all the other life forms are doing here. We're just basically a tube in one end and a tube on the other end, and in the middle we have the stuff that we're digesting. And that's what I mean by ecosystem, is that it's not like, here's a tube and I'm putting some stuff in it. It's like, no, here is a very complex, seemingly infinitely complex network of cells, immunological cells, things that are happening in my blood, all kinds of my blood, all kinds of growth factors and neurotransmitters, and just a huge amount of of structure that makes up me, and that's interfacing with this microbiota, this what we call the microbiome, which is really the DNA of those microbiota, right? But what does that look like inside as it's filling, that whole internal canal of my digestive tract with life, and that life is then interacting with the ecosystem, which is the material I'm putting in the sense of the neurogastroenterology, right? And it's that balance that really has a huge impact on how we think, how we feel, our mood, getting upset easily, being calm.
Your tolerance for stimuli.
Yeah, all that stuff. And so, when I go back to kind of my study of plants, and, I was going to be a medical doctor. That's where I was headed. I was a biology student, and I went into pre-med, and I did 3.5 years at the University of Minnesota. I had 2 offices on campus. I was a TA. I was so into it. But at some point, I really started to see that the single target, single molecule pharmaceutical approach was an approach that was based on treating disease, not on healing people and healing our planet, healing the way we live. And that's where I shifted. I went into permaculture, and permaculture on this sort of macro scale of how do I live in a way that doesn't leave a bunch of byproducts that the rest of the people have to deal with? How can I live in a way that's clean, And so I started studying sustainability and permaculture. And then when I got to Chinese medicine, it was all about, wait a minute, this is permaculture in the human body. I'm developing the sustainable ecosystem. And the thing that stands out to me is that what makes us healthy is diversity, right? It's not any one bug. It's not any one combination. It's what a diverse microbiota looks like in one person that supports all this kind of adaptation, adaptability. And then the plants come in, and you're able to look at a person's constitution from this macroscopic place. With Chinese medicine, you take their pulse, look at their tongue, evaluate their skin, look at their nails, look in their eyes. And we have all these different, deep descriptors that feed into this system of traditional Chinese medicine, right? Which is a really a holistic system that's self-reflective. And you can start to say, oh, this person has some of this type of ecosystem change, like heat, for example. We talk a lot about heat or about cold. And then those things, we can say, oh, there's some heat in this person, and we can use plants that have a cooling nature. And that's hard for people to understand. What is that? That sounds like woo-woo stuff, right?
Well, it's all about the language. Like what people have to understand is you're using a language to communicate something that's very hard to communicate in the first place. Like it's, you're using language like hot and cold and cooling and heating and all these sort of things. But really what you're describing is something much more complicated and deep that it just wouldn't really make a lot of sense to try to tease that apart into like a really complicated statement. We have to be able to talk about things kind of quickly, and it makes sense to people, even if they don't understand the details of how that works. Which one reason why I like talking to you is because you do understand a lot about the the pharmacokinetics, these different things that are going on, like what you mean when you say something's cooling or heating. It's like you can get into that if you need to talk about what's actually happening in the body on a really complex level. But for most people, that kind of language is not helpful to them. They need something that they can digest themselves, and so that language is kind of intuitive, like people can relate to kind of quickly. And it's important to have that balance, to not just be able to speak the language, but understand the science and details of what you're talking about too. But I totally see that as it's a language game more than anything that people kind of have to understand.
Yeah, and like I said, it's the word heat in Chinese medicine has a very specific, it has a specific meaning within that system.
Right.
It's not just like you think of heat, you turn on your burner and your stove, or your thermostat. It's a little bit deeper than that, and it encompasses a lot of modern physiological concepts, right? Things like inflammation,
exactly.
with redness and things of that nature. But before going too deep into it, just my goal mostly is to try to help people see from that macro ecological place how you can look at a person and see how their ecosystem looks, viewing them. Like I said, their nails, their hair, their eyes, their skin, their lips, their the way they talk. All those things are information for me about that person. And then if I understand how the materials in the natural world relate to, let's just say, hot and cold.
Right.
I could pick something like silver, right, which is a very cooling mineral in the sense that it puts a damper on inflammatory processes. It shuts down that infectious, kind of heat condition that we see in people where there's pus and there's redness and there's yellow colors and things. It does a really good job of that. But taking that into the plants, they all have all these different what we call natures and flavors. And so those have been determined and settled on and, and thought about and deliberated on for literally millennia, by doctors who cared about their patients, cared about their villages, and, cared about the natural materials and how to apply them in an ecological way to the person, right? And to that constitution. And so back to that idea of the microbiome and how do we alter the way that people think and feel and make good choices? Well, plants have an incredible power and a role to play there that I think is really unique. And I think it's overlooked, One of the places I see, a lot of people heading in sort of this health revolution is into functional medicine, right?
Right.
And functional medicine is we have David Jones here, right in Ashland. He's one of the founders of functional medicine. I've sat with him a number of times. Michael Stone is one of their educators. And so I've talked to these folks in functional medicine, but they tend to apply the nutritional concepts and the, looking at the different microbiota that are present, for example, looking at, what's in the body as far as molds or toxins, Lyme disease, fungal infections, whatever, and then applying, very specific molecules still, and then looking at relationships in lab work and things. But the missing piece is the plants.
Right.
And a lot of these folks do food, but I do plants and I do medicine. I like plants as medicine as a foundational medicine for the world. And that's where I think we should be. I think we should be using plants as medicine from everything from how we grow it and farm it and live with it and know it to sharing it and extracting it and making it a medicine to how we take it and use it in our lives to create balance, in our ecosystem.
Yeah.